Great. Thanks so much for the warm introduction, Stephen, and welcome everybody for being here today. Thanks so much for being here. I've got a lot of slides. I go through a number of different issues really quickly. That's just sort of my presentation style. You will have access to all of these slides after. So if you want to go through them and see the references and that sort of thing, you can certainly do it that way as well. And I'm just going to find my little, where's my button that allows me, there we go, there to explore. So if you are tweeting this, feel free to use the hashtag Change11. I will follow that later. Certainly, I'll try to multitask as much as I possibly can. But if you want to get some of the resources for this, and I will post a slide there later, it's at mooc.wikispaces.com/Couros. And just to make sure that you all have it, I'm just going to type it in there, mooc.wikispaces.com/Couros, and you can get some of the resources there, and I'll also post the slides a bit later after this presentation. Once I get it done, I just had to do a little bit of tweaking, as I always do. So a little bit about me. Stephen did most of the introduction. I am at the University of Regina. Because this is about digital citizenship, I think we will discuss a little bit on the idea of the digital identity. And I think it's important to understand that today identity is much more distributed than it ever was before. Yeah, faces with names. Imagine that, which you can't often do in school sometimes. But if you look at, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, Flickr, YouTube, WordPress, and I think one of the interesting things about this is this is actually a tool I use called About.me, which a lot of my undergrads are starting to use now. They're using About.me to kind of give people a sense that I am sort of much more complex in terms of my online identity, and it kind of gives affirmation to what we do in our terrestrial spaces. We have a number of different hats we wear in terms of coming to grips with our identity, and I think that's just becoming more complex and more distributed when we start to think about these online spaces where we inhabit these online spaces as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of digital citizenship, which is a term that has gained some wide attention, especially in schools. And I think it really comes out from this area. We used to talk a lot more about cyber safety, which often is safety from content, safety from private, be careful about privacy and that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of an interesting beginning or background to a lot of this. But I don't think we're in that space anymore. I think we've really, most of us, I think, at least certainly in education, we've moved beyond cyber safety, and we're moving towards this concept of digital citizenship, which is a much more proactive way of looking at this. So this is kind of from that cyber safety era, which I guess some of us still live in. This is one from an Ontario company around security. Meet Buffy. He's the 17-year-old high school cheerleader that you've been chatting with on the web. And there was a lot of really interesting thoughts around every single person is a predator on the web, and there's a lot of that sort of thing that was going on. And to sum it up in a short video, I'm going to just actually post a video here, and I'll see if I can get you to watch that. But it's just a couple of minutes long, and I just want to show you how the cyber safety initiatives, I guess, and the messages from them sort of permeated. And so here's an example of this, and if you can watch the video and come back, I'll also post it up here as well. So hopefully this allows you to play. Oh, maybe it's not letting me play. Oh, here, that's not cool. Here we go. Hey. All right, so I'm sorry if you weren't able to hear it there. It should have played in the viewer, but I'm not 100% sure. So this particular video, I mean, I like the idea of think before you post, to be thoughtful about what you post online. But in terms of the sort of the overboardness of this particular video, and really kind of a gendered piece as well, is that all men out there are creeps, and that people online especially are big creeps, and they're watching you and stalking you. And yes, it's meant to sort of disturb people in that sense, but that's really kind of, in summary, really looks at a lot of the cyber safety type as being a bit overboard, and being people not really considering very closely the research and the actuality of the risks on the web. And I think that was problematic for many, and it kept a lot of people, and it certainly looked, there's a whole legacy of that in schools in terms of overly restrictive policies around what you can actually do online. And that really comes from this legacy of just over-exaggerating some of the risks. And so if you look at the actual, I'm having some trouble finding my viewer here. Where'd it go? Did we still lose anything? We're still okay? Can you see things here? Oh, I see what's going on. Here's the viewer. Okay, great. If we kind of look at the actual literature, and that was that particular video. This is an article, Online Predators and Their Victims, Myths, Realities, and Implications for Prevention and Treatment. Just a couple of posts I took out of there. Posting personal information online does not by itself appear to be a particularly risky behavior, and social networking sites do not appear to have an increased risk of victimization by online molesters. As well, another report, Enhancing Child Safety in Online Technologies. Sexual predation is a concern. It existed before the internet, but is overblown by the media, which is an example of this particular video. Bullying and harassment are the most frequent threats faced by minors, both offline and online and offline. And that is something that's really been quite interesting to think about, that really the biggest and most prevalent threat still is bullying. And it's mostly less about kids on kids, really, but more about, about adults against kids, but it's more about kids on kids in terms of where the bullying actually happens. I think that's really something important, that still bullying is one of the most important things to look at, but it's not this cyber predator threat that's been sort of permeated in the press through multimedia. And then it's also interesting to think about content that, what is actually offensive? This is actually just the offensive tag on StumbleUpon. And certainly there are people that are still attracted to offensive content. There's a number of demographics do that. Kids are certainly curious around a lot of the stuff, but what might be offensive to you may not be offensive to others, and there's certainly communities around offensive content. There are new things that we can do that were not possible years ago. One of the recent things in the last few years was actually invented by, I think, a young 17-year-old kid from Russia, and it was something called chat roulette, which allows anyone in the world to basically click on a button, connect to a random webcam from someone else, and perhaps have a conversation. Now, it kind of got bad very quickly as people sort of played around with it, and it ended up having a lot of nudity and a lot of inappropriate behavior online. So what could have been really an amazing concept, like the idea that you can have a conversation via video, via random, through a random person, anyone across the world, and talk about politics, love, religion, anything that you wanted to talk about, is sort of the underlying idea of all this, but it really simply digressed to some things that were not quite appropriate in many cases. In fact, McGill University actually, because of this, actually developed something that was actually a nudity detection software that came to chat roulette. So even the technology around it was quite interesting and sophisticated to think about how do we deal with problems of, say, nudity on the web. And YouTube and Google and others have done other types of technologies that look at detecting things like nudity or offensive content, which is really kind of an interesting industry to think about, kind of detecting things that we want to keep ourselves away from. So a lot of the cyber safety agenda really kind of fell under the idea that we can control things, that we need to be fearful and create fear, that our actions and the technologies that come from it can be predicted, that this is all predictable. But if you look at things like chat roulette and some of the new technologies, I think some of it, even the new social networks that came out, it's really kind of interesting to think that some of this stuff can't be predicted, and that kids are vulnerable, that all kids should be vulnerable, and that they need protection in all these ways. And we're actually finding a generation of teens and tweens that are much more savvy than what we ever thought. And there's a lot of work coming out of Dana Boyd's research that sort of confirms that sort of idea, that kids aren't as vulnerable as we think in some cases. And of course, this idea of control, that we can't really control content or kids' access to content or anyone's access to content. Since we've had the personal hotspot in schools, now a kid can create a wireless network for a number of people. He could become, using an iPhone, to create an entire free wireless router for other kids in the classroom. So firewalls just are meaningless. On the left there, it's actually a tool I use called WeTopia, which is a service I actually subscribe to. I pay about $70 a year, and it allows me to basically connect to any server around the world to use a virtual private network. So when I was in China recently, I used this to connect to a Hong Kong server, so I wasn't blocked from Facebook or Twitter or any of the other tools that I wanted to use. And anyone can download this and use it on their computer, on their iPhone, on their mobile devices, whatever they want to, and get around these particular issues and blocks. So it's really impossible to block some of the things that we want access to, and I think we have to get around that sort of idea. So digital citizenship is a concept which helps teachers and technology leaders understand what students should know to use technology appropriately. But digital citizenship is more than just a teaching tool. It is a way to prepare students for a society full of technology. And that's really moving towards, yes, it is absolutely an impressive tool to get around censorship. I would recommend it, and censorship not in just governments, but also in schools. I think schools in some ways block more content than very restrictive governments in some cases, and that's really a sad thing and a travesty, really. So what I'm basically going to go through today is really this idea of info and media literacy, quickly through copyright and copyleft, a bit about identity, network literacy, and again a bit about activism. And as you know, I'm kind of taking you through this really quick tour. Just seems to be kind of the style of the way I kind of put things through. Is it allowed in the schools in China, though? Well, it is allowed depending on the school. So the schools that I worked with were typically American embassy type schools, and it is allowed there mostly. But now if you look at, certainly foreigners would have probably more flex to be able to use these types of tools, and in some cases they actually have agreements with government because they want to make sure that they can keep these schools there because they are business and important for the politics of the region as well. But in terms of any school, yeah, probably not. I mean, they're not technically allowed to be able to use, but they're very prevalent in use with a number of people that are there. So first of all, just this idea of info and media literacy, and this has been something important. I don't know how many people recognize this photograph, but most of you should. It's actually from 1934, Loch Ness Monster, yes, Nessie. So most people remember this, and it wasn't until many years later, this was actually known as the surgeon's photo. So if you want to actually Google that, you can certainly do that. It was not, I mean, it was always thought to be a hoax, but it wasn't confirmed many years later by the person who actually created it. But it's a hoax that in some ways created this entire Loch Ness industry. And it's really interesting that a particular lie in the 1934 perpetuated this. And I remember in the 1970s growing up as a kid and seeing this and being totally fascinated by this photograph. And of course, I'd never thought at that point that it would be a hoax. This must be the real thing. And many people thought that along the way. Another photograph I use to look at the importance of visual literacy is this. I actually asked my my undergrad students who's depicted in this photograph, and you can feel free to let me know who you think is in this photograph. Some of you know, and some of you may not know. But I'm amazed to know that hardly any of my undergrads will know anything about this. Lee Harvey Oswald in the middle, and on the right, who's the killer here in this case? Jack Ruby, right? Yeah, Jack Ruby, exactly. So this particular photograph has been edited in a number of different ways, and probably one of the best renditions is this one. So this is the one I show to students first, and I say, "Did you ever hear about this band?" It was, Lee Harvey and the Wailers. They're a great '60s band. They're, amazing. And you look at this sort of thing, and you compare it to the original back here, and you notice that it doesn't take much to create some change in a visual. And because I have authority over my students, I'm able to tell them whatever I want and to let them know, what does authority mean? Why do you believe me, for instance? Why do you believe what I've told you? Why can't you dig a bit deeper? And I think it's becoming very, very problematic in the digital age that we trust different types of authority, and authority has certainly changed in many ways right now. So, I mean, there are websites that have been around for a long time. Like, for instance, there are people that still believe that we've never been on the moon, the fake Apollo landings, and there's websites on the case for this, or in the case for not, I guess. So which is kind of interesting to look at these hoaxes or myths and decide whether they're true or fake. There's a growing movement, and it's continued since 9/11. Some people believe that 9/11 was an inside job, and there are truthers, 9/11 truthers, that believed that it was an inside job conspiracy by the government at the time, and that there was financial records involved. And there's a number of videos, really compelling videos that you look at. And because I'm not an engineer, and because I don't know anything about explosives or thermite reactions and all of the stuff that they use in these things, how would I know? I'm trained in education. I'm a teacher, a PhD in education, but I know nothing about how a building is demolished. And I'm not saying this is true or not, but how am I to discern, as an educated individual in one specific area, how am I to discern what truth is? How can I know truth? How do I know something is true? And I think that's a really important thing when we start to look at critical media literacy. How do we understand what's true out there, and you know, how do we determine what's true enough, and why does it matter? And I think that's important as well. And there's all sorts of hoaxes. It's not just big mainstream media that you know, does it to us anymore. It's anyone with a webcam and a YouTube account that can actually put quotes out on the web, which is, or sorry, play hoaxes on us. And I think this is kind of an interesting one. There was a video going around that says how to charge an iPod using electrolytes and an onion. So it was a person who created this video that put like a, very existential, put a, an onion in a glass of Gatorade, and then they actually used it to charge an iPod. And so many people tried this. They actually looked at the video. It seemed very compelling, and people were like, yes, this is great. I want to use this, and I don't need a battery charger anymore. I can do this with an onion, and I can show my friends and all sorts of things. And, of course, all it does is just gunk up your iPod cable, and that's about it. And this was actually featured on Mythbusters, I believe, as well. And it's kind of very appealing, very nice. It was on Mythbusters, but what's interesting is people who were in the comments were in on the hoax too, because they may have tried it and they wanted other people to try it as well. So people who tried it and realized it was a hoax became perpetuators of the hoax in many ways. So it was kind of neat to see the way this actually changed. And it was, it's a very layered problem, absolutely. It's not just big government lying to us anymore. It's anyone with a compelling story that can lie to us in whatever way they want. And that's a real big difference. Participatory media means participatory in every sense of the word, and I think that's important to look at. This was something that went on the web for a while, and I love these ones. It's the trouble with quotes on the internet is that you can never know if they are genuine, and most of you would understand that's not a relevant quote. But I love this one. Kind of made me laugh when I first saw that. And then there's other renditions of this particular one. Oops, here we go. Do or not, there is no try. Do or do not, there is no try. So kind of mixing this up and considering the type of literacy you'd have to know. So if you've never watched Star Wars, if you've never seen Lord of the Rings, for instance, you would never really get this joke in many ways. So there's actually a lot of layering to understanding and being literate today, especially when there's a lot of seemingly inside jokes, even if this is more around popular media and literature. Yes, I mean, it's just kind of interesting to look at things like that and how layered some of these things are. And of course, these are deliberate, but kind of a lot of fun. Then there's this whole thing around memes, and you've probably heard the term meme, but you may not have known what a meme was or what why a meme is important. So memes actually go back for a while. It's around the idea of cultural contagion. The gene has its cultural analog too, the meme. In cultural evolution, a meme is a replicator and a propagator, an idea, a fashion, a chain letter, or a conspiracy theory. On a bad day, a meme is a virus. Absolutely, there is. I've seen actually every South Park episode, and there's an excellent one on memes. And you actually probably saw a lot of these. I'll look at the next one, but there's actually a slide I have coming up that shows a lot of the different memes that you may have seen. I love this quote from Henry Jenkins. In hunting culture, kids play with bows and arrows. In an information society, they play with information. And that's just really kind of a beautiful thing that we're able to do that. We're able to play with information. A lot of these memes are really that. There's one that's going on right now on Reddit that I saw just develop over the last day. There's a guy who's incredibly photogenic, and someone showed him running a marathon or something, and so they've taken this guy. If you follow Reddit, it's big there today over the last couple of days, but you can watch these memes start at nothing and just blow in. You know which ones are going to be huge in many ways. So you may have known some of these popular memes. You got the Star Wars kid, you got Dancing Matt, the Numa Numa guy, the tragic, I forget, there's a number of different ones here. Some of you may know some of these. If you ask your kids or the students you work with, I bet they typically would know a lot more than you would in terms of, and I'm not saying that is demeaning, I'm just saying that kids are more connected to a lot of these things, certainly part of their culture in many different ways. And I do agree with Tom Reeves on we do need a wisdom society. I'm not sure what that looks like, though, but it's really, and Charlie's there, exactly. And there's, of course, ways to propagate and perpetuate memes. There's something called the meme generator that allows you to basically take any popular meme out there and add your own words. So you actually become part of this, and you want your meme or your version of that particular meme to be bigger. Winning is an example of a meme. And so there's a number of them. I actually follow this Twitter account because it can be quite funny at times, although it's a little scary at times. But this is condescending Willy Wonka. This is one of these memes out there. And it's always this sort of condescending statement. Oh, you deactivated your Facebook account. You must be so focused and free from distractions now. And in these, Rickrolled is another one. In these, there's some sort of social commentary, which is kind of an interesting thing. That memes aren't just, they're value-laden. It's about what we value in life. There's a number of ideas there, but also the content itself is value-laden, and it gives us a bit of a snapshot of what we value today. Love this one. Another condescending Willy Wonka one. Oh, you have a North Face jacket. You must go on so many adventures. Okay, so we'll move past that guy. Here's one called Scumbag Steve, which is actually a guy who's supposed to be a really nice guy. So they find these pictures of someone, and all of a sudden they become a meme, and they actually found this guy. So, and a lot of us may have known or grew up with, they say, Scumbag Steve, accepts money to take a cab, drives home drunk. Another one from him, quit smoking his own cigarettes. That sort of thing. Again, that's a bit of a social commentary on something. There's actually the one called the unhelpful high school teacher, and I'd hate to end up with being one of these memes in some cases, but you could end up being one. Get the right answer. You didn't use the method I showed you. That teacher that wants to make sure that you're using the right method. A bit of a commentary on that. Another one, lectures class about wasting time for the entire period or for the whole period. So this kind of idea, again, the idea of using a meme to sort of make a statement in some ways. And of course, they get bigger and they can be much more political. When there was the pepper spraying that happened at UC Davis a while back, I love this quote from Zach Whitaker. For all the money, tax revenue, and intelligence that Western governments have at their disposal, they seemingly cannot get their heads around a simple enough concept that wherever one is, someone is watching and recording. And I love this. So this was actually, I forget what was last, I'll find out in a second. This became a big meme for quite some time. And of course, they take this image. And if you saw the video, I'm not sure how many people saw the video, but this is basically him pepper spraying students sitting on the ground, totally passive as they sit on the ground, and he went around and sprayed them quite good. And it was an appalling act. His name was John Floyd, I believe, and so here's one particular example of a meme. Here's Pike Floyd, The Dark Side of the Law. Another example in an artistic sense. As JR says, I was floored by how many cameras you see in the background of all those images and videos. Exactly. I mean, people are just watching it. And it's amazing to know that you could do something in front of others like that, knowing it's wrong, and still not worry about where it's going to end up in many cases. The Lego one, there's the Dancing with the Stars one. Of course, and this is another thing, and this is a brand new one. I mean, this is, again, a meme in many ways. Coney 2012, if you missed it, I mean, if you don't know anything about Coney 2012, I'd be amazed because it was such a big deal for the longest time here. From a social media perspective, it did just about everything right. So if you look at that, I mean, it targeted supernodes. It targeted 20 individuals in culture, 12 people in policy, and used them as supernodes. So in many ways, it was kind of interesting to see how it actually was played out. The video was compelling. The video was emotional. What they put out there was really quite interesting. But where it sort of ended, I mean, where it sort of fell flat, I guess, and of course the Coney 2012 social media tag was big. Many people have talked about this much more eloquently than I have, but I think because it was done so many ways and because it made something at least seemingly actionable. And I guess it's yet to be seen what happens on April 20th when they actually do something called Cover the Night, how far this has actually gone. But, to have the 70 or 100 million hits in such a short time, it was sort of the biggest video in such a short time, and it was shared by absolutely everyone. Every one of my students was buzzing around Coney 2012 the next day. But of course, there's a lot of controversy from the other side of things to look at. What are we supporting here? Very few people asked, what am I actually supporting here? And ultimately, you're supporting an armed intervention, a U.S. armed intervention into a conflict that many people didn't know about until from the day before, which is really kind of interesting to think of how that worked. So it seemed like a really compelling story, but it shows how much a compelling story can actually make you do something that perhaps you don't really fundamentally believe in if you knew the entire issue. And so the other thing around citizenship, which I think I try to ask a lot of students, is what does it mean when you like something? When you like something on Facebook, when you like a video, when you retweet something on Twitter, are you endorsing it? Are you believing that? Are you with it, believing whatever values are espoused by that particular video or media? And it's really kind of an important thing, because you are at that second selling it to all of your friends. You're endorsing it to everyone. You're spreading that particular idea to everyone else. And I think that's really an important thing, is what does it actually mean to like somebody? And to ask about that and to think deeper. And I think the Coney 2012 one is a really good one to think about. I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying one side or the other, but it's such a complex issue that liking something like Coney 2012 does not really allow you to dig deeper into something like that, like an issue this complex that's gone on for so long. I'm a bit paranoid about liking stuff. Also, I sometimes wonder if Facebook makes it up, because some friends also in many cases, I think there are things that like things for you. So I think that's important. Yeah, and Stephen, yeah, exactly. Having to apologize for clicking like on a funeral notice. Like, what does that mean? It's really kind of interesting. Yeah, in fact, Lisa, as you mentioned, there used to be a Chrome plugin that allowed you to actually create an unlike button, but I think Facebook blocked it. But there has been a recent story about something different. It's not quite unliking, but it's something also. But really, Facebook wants you to like something in that case. Oh, I think, okay. The next big issue, I think, is this whole idea of copyright and copyleft. I know you talked a lot about this throughout Change11, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. I mean, the idea of the Creative Commons, this to me is one of the most important parts of digital citizenship that we miss. The understanding of how important the commons is, and how important the building on creativity and the sharing of certain creativity, how important that actually is. And of course, when you look at the content that's available to us, whether it's content that's open or public domain or copyleft or whatever else, or just available in a number of different formats, I mean, we've certainly gone, and you've heard this many times, towards this abundance economy where it's often difficult to actually think about this whole idea that Barry Schwartz brings up around the idea of paradox of choice, that we just have so much choice, that there's so much content available. And to most teachers, this is a whole new thing that we've never experienced before. We used to hoard textbooks. We used to hide them in our classrooms because we didn't have enough. And now we have so much, and the choices around that are so much different. And then what can we actually do with videos? Even from a fair use and fair dealing perspective, I don't think we nearly do that well enough, because most of our attitude towards things like fair use and fair dealing are usually, from a legal standpoint, often certainly risk averse in many ways, that we don't want. We want to be very careful about what we do, but we're not. Even Michael Geist, one of our Canadian sort of IP copyright experts, is saying that Canadians, for instance, aren't using fair dealing to the extent that we possibly can. If we don't use it, if we don't really use fair dealing or fair use, we're going to certainly lose it and watch it be chipped away in many ways. So this is actually an example of a guy by the name of Couros. And if you haven't seen this, if you click on that button there, you can actually press play and watch this video for a few seconds here. And I'm going to talk over it. if you can hear both at the same time. But what you've basically done here is this is actually a composer by the name of Ismail Kudaman, I believe. And what he's done is basically taken a bunch of different tracks from the internet, and he's built music from it. So all these people in the video, if you look at the first one, I'm not sure if you can see it right now or not, but basically you have a bongo player, you have another percussionist, you have a bass guitarist and a guitarist, and these people have never met each other. Basically they're unrelated YouTube videos that this guy's basically put together. So he's extracted, he's curated all of this content to make something absolutely brand new. The difference, I guess, with the brainy, the Eric Whitaker video is the idea that it was actually he asked for it. I guess he gave them an assignment and he got them to look in their webcams and sing. But in this particular case, the difference is that he took things that already existed on the web. So he didn't ask them to do something. He basically took existing content and made something brand new. So these people never knew they'd be in a band, but this Kudaman brought them all together. And there's 9 tracks here, and there's actually the last one kind of explains how he did this. And it's really kind of an interesting thing. So yeah, so it's the difference between, this is more of a mashup, where the other one would have been kind of an invitation and assignment. And I actually do mention that here. And I think it's really kind of interesting to think about that. So there is a bit of a difference there. This is another one by a guy by the name of Madian. I think he's a 17-year-old kid here. If you want to, I'll just find his link. And I may be spelling it wrong, but I'll look at his Wikipedia page. Here we go. Madian. Electropop producer from France. So at the age of 11, okay, I'll find the one that he actually did here. So he did one called Madian. I'll just YouTube it. It'll be the first one that comes up probably. Sorry, got to be better at links. Okay, so this one has 10 million views. So 10 million views, or at least 10 million views. And if you want to watch this video, I'll just kind of move it over here. And if you can watch this for a couple seconds, and I'll kind of explain what's going on here. So maybe just watch it for a couple seconds while I'll take care of a couple things over here. Sorry, I just had to end it there for you. If you want to take a look at it, it's really quite interesting. So he takes 39 of his songs, and he's using this, I forget what the device is actually called, but I know it's in the YouTube notes if you want to take a look at it. I tried buying one, but they're not available in Canada right now. But basically, every one of those buttons, you can insert a sample. So he's taken samples from a number of different songs, and those become his notes, which is really kind of an interesting thing. Amazing to think about this, to what he's done. And so he did this within the realm of fair use, because he's creating something absolutely new. He hasn't been sued or anything yet. This is part of what he does. And then it's interesting to see on YouTube, like someone actually took all of the pieces of video from the music videos, and then so someone added to what he did. So those 39 artists contributed to his success, and then another artist created the music video that accompanied this. And there's just all of these different remixes and mashups based on this particular mashup. It's just really a beautiful thing seeing this thing come together on the web. So that's a little about him. That's the video version. And of course I always bring my kids into every single one of these videos. So we used to consume a lot more, but we're at the point where we're not really consuming to that same extent. And now we can certainly produce a lot more, which I think is a whole new literacy moving towards this idea. And this is my kid, my boy with a camera, and it's amazing. And I've looked at this picture many times because he actually has taken pictures since he's been 2 years old, and he has a big folder of all of these photographs. And it's photos that I could not have ever taken because it's from his perspective. And it's not just that it's a photograph of someone's knee, but it's the way he views the world. And when we look at media, I think it's so incredibly important to see that everything, the idea of the term media is from mediate, and to understand that we are mediating our experiences. We're allowing someone else to see through our lens. And to do that from kids or not. It's so incredibly important, and that's why production, creating things is so important in school and so undervalued in so many different ways. And of course, my girl, since the age of 5, has been able to remix videos. She's been able to, take things from YouTube and things that she's created and mash them up on her MacBook Pro. And it's not that she's a genius; it's that she's given the tools. One of the biggest issues around digital citizenship is that do we have kids who have the access to the tools of the things of cultural expression today? And I think that's one of the things that I want to make sure that we create create kids that actually have access to this. And of course, beyond this is the idea of sharing, making sure that we are able to also share in the ways that we found these things, which is one of the vital pieces of a Creative Commons license, that in many cases that we want to make sure that we share alike. Yes, Green, Saskatchewan, believe it or not, we do have a couple of days that's actually kind of nice. So, together, consuming, producing, remixing, and sharing, I think there's a lot of different ways and nuances that we can certainly frame this, but I think it's important to start to think about it. It's actually a beautiful day in Saskatchewan today. I'm quite amazed. So moving beyond this and then moving to the idea of network literacy, I think is really important, and I think that's part of what we've been talking about here. And I'm going to have to forgive myself because I'll have to change things in a little bit here. And I'm sorry I'm kind of going on, but I am passionate about this stuff at the very least. If you look at network literacies, Reingold, you've had in this course, I remember him saying, understanding how networks work is one of the most important literacies in the 21st century. Obama and the politics around that. Locally, the mayor of Calgary had a huge social media campaign. There will be always a place for social media in politics, whether it's used well or not, is really kind of important. In the services that we use, TripAdvisor, to think that there are people around the world that just want to leave, some sort of record of where they've stayed, whether it was a good time at a hotel or a bad time or a mediocre time. Someone takes the time to actually add this to our human knowledge so that when the next person actually comes to this hotel, that they can decide accurately whether or not this is a good place to stay. And I think it's really important. And to see the reaction of hotels, of those that come in there and want to make sure that people are treated well and fairly and that their reputation is on the line as well, is kind of important as well. So it's kind of neat. Couchsurfing, one of my students from last semester actually did couchsurfing. This is a community of people who basically, through a reputation system, decide to stay on each other's couches or stay at each other's places. This is the modern day hitchhiking, which is really kind of cool. I love this project. If you haven't followed Dear Photograph, it's one that I would highly recommend. This is basically a community around one particular project, and it was basically to take a photograph of a time in the past and to place it over the current day. And this particular one really got me. And I saw someone tweet this out, and it said, "Dear Photograph, thank you for everything we had." And so I actually, it's a beautiful project. I think we need to do more of that sort of thing project. And it's not a very difficult one to be part of. I tweeted the guy and I said, because I was doing a presentation in the UK the next day, is there a chance I can use your Dear Photograph piece in a presentation I'm giving in the UK tomorrow? And he said simply this: feel free. The paper photo was taken about 15 years ago. She was battling cancer with grace. Today he is still in love. And I thought, for that second, how powerful can a photograph or a tweet be in these ways? And because we often sort of, it's just Twitter and it's just 140 characters, and we think about that moment that for me, which resonated for me and made me sort of teary in that sense, to think that that person is sharing such an important moment of his father's life, in this case, and how people do that and how people trust things. And if we block kids from this, we are taking away such a huge part of the human experience. And I think that's just a sad, sad thing, and I think we're just doing them an entire disservice. Love this example. This was actually on Reddit. This is a photo that came up on Reddit. Mito Mari, 2 days ago, he returned from the hospital after being hacked in the face by a machete, defending an orphanage of 35 children by himself. I think we could raise the $2,000 needed for the remainder of the cement barbed wire wall to keep both him and the children safe. So it was just an anonymous poster on Reddit who basically brought this issue to people's attention. And you saw the community, the Reddit community, which is often criticized, It was real in this case, absolutely real. But I think that's a really important thing, is how do we know if it's real or a hoax or that sort of thing. But watching this actually happen, and with Reddit, they actually have a verification deal, which is really kind of an important thing. They actually have moderators that verify people in many cases. I'm not sure how it works. I never really looked at it, but I know moderators will very quickly sniff out whether these things are real or not, and they often ask for verification of, you know, who are you, can you verify, and I think there's a process that people don't actually see around it. I think that's kind of important to think. Yeah, so I think if you look at I know because a lot of people try to pull hoaxes in terms of, you know, I've got cancer or I've got this or that, and so often there is, like when a hoax is caught, that's also really a big story because people will shame that person big time for doing what they've done. But I think that's really an important thing that I wasn't intending to get into. But watching this, you know, if the donations reach over 2,000, then it got to 9,000, then over 11,000, 44,000. Like they only asked for $2,000, and it ended up being like $50,000. Really kind of interesting and an amazing story. Of course, there are things like the Eric Whitaker story, which someone mentioned as well. If you want to Google that, just Google virtual choir. Amazing project. The Johnny Cash project, if you haven't seen that, where people crowdsource this video. And the other one is like the Star Wars Uncut. Now I'm going to try to do a little bit of a transition here. What I've got to try to do is see if I can load the rest of my slides, because there's a limitation, because I just kind of do too much, I think, sometimes. But I am promising I'm getting to the end. There's not much left. So will it let me do it? Please, please, please. Good so far, good so far? Yes, okay. That wasn't too bad. And there's Star Wars Uncut. Hey, that was actually much better than I thought it would be. I'm trying to keep watching, you know, everyone's comments and that sort of thing. So you can hear me? You're all still with me? You're okay? Yes, I got it. Okay. Thanks a lot. Oh, very cool. All right, so I'll try to get this very quickly, and hopefully we can have some time to discussion still. I love this quote. This is actually, I think, from Dean Shareski. And it's, if you generally think of the internet as a place to look up stuff, you're missing the best part. And I think this is so incredibly important to me, that we always think about, we used to think Web 1.0, whatever that might have been, was really about the content. And this is really, to me, much more about relationships. Everything I do on Twitter, content might be the sort of the idea of this object-centered sociality. That is the thing that makes us socialize, right? But it's not the important part. The most important part of my PLN or PLE or whatever it may be is less about what I'm actually creating and more about how I'm creating it and how I'm collaborating. And that may not be true about every single artifact that I create. I think there's some really important piece, but so much more that we've got to get out of this idea of content being the most important thing that we create. Now, moving on to the idea of identity, and I think this is incredibly important. And one of the most important issues around digital citizenship is our identity. So if you think about kids these days, and you know, the average digital birth of children happens at about 6 months in these 6 countries. Approximately 81% of children under the age of 2 have some kind of digital footprint. In the same article, they mentioned that about 37% of kids these days have some sort of digital identity before they're even born. So that might be a sonogram shared in Facebook, for instance, before, you know, kids are born. So obviously there's been a lot of attention around this idea of a digital identity, and we're going to just take another quick break. We're going to actually watch something called Dear Sophie. It's a Google Chrome commercial, and just to give us a break and me from talking. And here we go, and I'll try to put it up here. You can either click on the link or I'll share it up in this piece too. There we go. All right, I'm assuming you're able to see that. I mean, it kind of just, like, it's obviously a Chrome commercial, but I love the idea of it, kind of how it showcases how we might be sharing our children's identity with others. And it's something I'm fairly shameless about, and I talk a lot about this idea because I do it with my children, certainly, and not everyone agrees with what I do, but I think it's really kind of important. Thanks, JR. Thanks for coming. But I think it's important to consider what we're doing, and sometimes I do that, I think, very well, sometimes perhaps not as well, but it's something that we have an obligation to, not only of our students, but of our children, but of our students as well. I think very much important. So if you think about media and identity and how this often works, if you look at the Star Wars Kid, if you've heard of him, if you Google the Star Wars Kid, you'll find a Wikipedia article, which I think is really an interesting thing. By the way, what's interesting about the Wikipedia article, if you look in the discussions, there's this huge discussion about whether or not they ever name his actual name. You can find out who this kid is all over the internet. And I won't say it here, but in the Wikipedia discussion pages, I think it's really interesting to see that they're not naming this kid in the article, and there's a debate about whether or not that's important. And I think that's kind of important, about the ethics of information. This is sort of an aside, but it's interesting. But this kid was from Quebec. It actually tells you the entire story of how this happened. Basically, he left a bit of a video. He actually, there's a videotape that he was in his school studio doing some stuff with a golf ball retriever, pretending to be one of the Siths on Star Wars, and he left the videotape in there. Some other kids taped a football game over it, and at the end, the football tape ended, and then there was a bit of this video that people put on the web. And this was before YouTube. This was before it became very easy. And it's funny because I actually tell this to my students, and they're like, what do you mean that there was something remaining at the end of the tape? They don't understand how analog recording works, for instance. It's really kind of interesting that, you know, something is not just deleted over it. Anyway, so, but an interesting thing, because there are some ramifications. In July 2003, 2 years before YouTube, the student's family filed a $250,000 lawsuit against the family of 4 of his schoolmates. The lawsuit stated in part that he had to endure, and still endures today, harassment and derision from his high school mates and from the public at large. So if you've seen the video, now you know the background, at least, of this particular story, and realizing that when you pass it around, that this sort of thing is going on. He's actually a law student at McGill today. So although I sort of know who he is and that sort of thing, he's always going to be part of the Star Wars Kid. That's the one thing, whether he did suffer or not, which it seems to be clear he did, it's always going to be part of his identity, which is really important. Justin Bieber, if you haven't followed his sort of journey, someone found him on YouTube as a producer and decided to basically make the kid famous. And it's funny, I was in Australia recently, last summer, and instead of asking me how cold it was, people asked me if I knew Justin Bieber. He's become this new Canadian idol, which has sort of replaced any of our other Canadian stars in many ways. But there's some really interesting videos around that. You look at the David After the Dentist, how quickly a video like this sort of became this really, really big deal. There are stories like this where this particular girl known as the Cisco Fatty now, she tweeted this. She said, "Cisco just offered me a job. Now I have to weigh the utility of a fatty paycheck against a daily commute and hating to work." And after she tweeted that, one of the VPs of Cisco saw that, and they took her job away, I guess, so she lost her job. There's all sorts of issues around teachers losing their jobs for what they said on Facebook, for instance. This is a teacher who's spotted on Facebook who described her students as germ bags and parents as snobby and arrogant. She lost her job. There's others who are drinking who lost their jobs. This was actually from something in Saskatchewan last year. This was modeled after the best job in the world from Australia, which was a really interesting contest where 34,000 people submitted 1-minute videos to apply. This was a government job last year, and basically you had to apply through it via social media, and then you could basically tweet and Flickr and YouTube for the entire summer, and you basically promote Saskatchewan. It's kind of a Saskatchewan tourism type thing. But what was interesting is the guy who was in the lead, the best social media profile, ended up losing the job. He was disqualified over a video of him swearing at a Riders game. The video was 2 years earlier. It was out of context. It was at a football game, which is a whole different context. It was in a university section of the football game, which made it even more, I guess, common to swear, I guess. I'm not saying swearing is good, but to think about that, this context and this other context were brought together. This entire context collapse that was brought here. And so what you did 2 years ago in a totally unrelated context totally implicates what you can do in terms of getting a job, which is really an interesting thing. So he lost his opportunity to have a really great job because something surfaced like that. The Vancouver riots a while ago, there was a lot of people very angry at the Vancouver riots, and if you haven't heard about those, basically Canada lost a hockey game, people got very mad, and there was riots and turmoil throughout the city. But there was a public shaming site. There was actually something called Public Shaming Attorneys that popped up. One of the kids that was caught was a kid by the name of Nathan Kodalak, and there was a picture of him actually burning, setting on fire a police car, and soon that ended up on this public shaming site back here. Public shaming site, people found him, were able to identify him. He was a prospective Olympian, exactly. He had scholarships, he was an honor student, but now he had to kind of basically give that up. What was interesting about this story is because he was a young offender, he was 17 years old. So the media, mainstream media wasn't allowed to say his name, but everyone else could, like bloggers and so on. They know who he was, they can use his name, they can point to everything else. So mainstream media, by law, weren't allowed to say who he was. Everyone else could. And what was interesting was he had to actually get permission from a lawyer to go through it legally to release his identity so that he could defend his identity. So in some ways, you have to know who you are to actually defend your identity. We need to sort of, it's just kind of an ironic thing in some ways, I think, which is interesting at so many different levels. Alexandra Wallace, who I actually posted in your notes, follow that story. Basically, a girl who's now known as the UCLA racist girl. And if you follow the meme thing, you can get more context into that. So I think identity is quite important, but we'll get back to that in a second. I'm just going to finish this last piece. One of the things I've mentioned around Facebook and around a lot of the recent activism is this is Facebook causes, for instance, and there is this sort of growing idea amongst young people that you can click on a button and you save the world in some ways. And I don't think that social media companies are really helping with that. There's a number of other ways to do that. For instance, one of the things I recommend to my students is the microloaning site called Kiva, which a lot of students are now using. It's one of the other things that I think is a bit better than traditional social media. Activism through YouTube, things like free hugs. If you haven't followed that, Google free hugs and get a sense of what this did, which was kind of an interesting thing. Probably the ones that I think are really prevalent. If you look at the idea of the It Gets Better project by Dan Savage, really interesting to see the outpouring of videos of people who are basically saying it gets better, people who grew up as LGBT youth who went through some really, really tough times and use their voices to encourage others as well. Unfortunately, there was one boy, Jamie Rodemeyer, who, although he participated in the project, he actually submitted a video of him saying it gets better and telling his story and encouraging others. Unfortunately, he was also died via his own hand through suicide. 14-year-old boy from New York warned in an internet posting that he felt suicidal because of homophobic bullying, has been found dead outside his home. Really, a really, really sad story, and many people have been, upset about this sort of thing. Really a big problem in our schools. But the question I think we have to ask students, I think, around digital citizenship, because I think this is where it often typically stops, is, what sort of impact will you have? Just an example of now this wasn't a real big deal in some ways, but it was a big deal in many other ways, that this whole Stop Online Piracy Act, the SOPA bill that was being shoved down people's throats, that people really came together and they protested this. And this was actually quite something, although there is something new to replace it now. But it was actually a successful example of online protesting in many ways. But what I'll leave you with, I think, before I just sort of finish off, is one of the biggest differences now is the difference that you can make now. And I think as a kid before, I didn't have nearly the tools that I probably could have had when I grew up. But the tools that kids have today are just so incredibly important. I think to understand what the power they have in terms of networks, in terms of publication tools, media tools, it's just shocking to me. And so in thinking about these kind of big issues, as adults, we are here. We've developed these tools for students. We've given cell phones to our kids. We've given cell phones to just about everyone. We use cell phones in classrooms, but we don't allow kids to use cell phones in many ways. And I think this is really important, that we've created this sort of environment, but we're leaving our kids to sort of navigate it without even trying to help them in some ways. And not that we should, define what this looks like, but we don't allow them to define what it looks like in many different cases. And I think it's really important that we do this in school, that digital citizenship and the ability to use tools in school is so incredibly important. But to look at terms like this, even the idea of digital citizenship, I think is a misnomer, that we just have to understand that we have a shifting idea of what citizenship means, that instead of digital identity, we're really looking at the idea of identity, and that's really the big deal with this. And in terms of identity, this is actually a sign that was found not too far from my house. It's a sign at a Chinese restaurant, and I just always loved this, so I took a photograph of it, and it says, "Enjoy Plum Garden, highly recommended by the owner." We can't do that anymore. We can't basically say, look, this is who I am, and I'm going to write everything about myself on some sort of little web page, and that's who I am. It's not going to work that way anymore, and it really never has. People talk about us in coffee shops and all sorts of things. There's people outside of us that find our identity in many different ways. Of course, we have a huge part in that, but identity is complex, and it's not just created by someone who creates a sign and says, look, I'm a good person. I do love this, though. This is from Seth Godin, everything you do now ends up in your permanent record. The best plan is to overload Google with a long tail of good stuff and to always act as if you're on candid camera, because you are. And I think that really kind of pushes towards this idea that we have to think more freely about our identity. Seth is always coming up with good stuff. You have to think more about this idea that we need to be kind of good and always on, always kind of the same person. There's an integrity across all forms of our identity, and I think we have to really think about that. We can't be a bad person online and expect to be a good person face to face, and that can't be different things. And I think we just have to kind of bring a bit of a unity and integrity towards all sort of senses of our identity, and really realize that identity is just one sort of thing. So that's about it. I'm sorry to take you so long. I know I kind of ramble on and so on, but if there are any questions or thoughts, I am, of course, I will be responding to Change11 this week if you have any particular questions. If you want to know more about some of these things, I know I went through a lot of stuff really quickly, and I'm not sure if I tied it together very well. But I do want to certainly, push this idea and get you thinking more about digital citizenship, identity, and a lot of the issues that sort of surround all of this. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this, but I do want to thank you for being here today. So thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks, Alec. And as McLean's Ghost says, that was a great, thought-provoking presentation. And I know we're a little over 5 o'clock, but there's still a lot of people in the room, and I'm certainly up for opening it for a few questions. If anybody would like to type something in, which I'll relate, or jump in with a question, if that's okay with you. And I see you saying sure. So why don't I just shut up and see if anyone would like to jump in with a comment or a question. And we have Verena asking if you could chat a bit more about cyberbullying, Alec.
Sure. I mean, I'm not exactly sure where I can take that. It continues to be the number one problem, as I mentioned before, in our schools. And now, but a lot of things around it, for instance, now texting is certainly part of it, but some of the things that were done before, I guess, aren't being used. So some of the web forums aren't being used, but I'm trying to remember what the newest one is. There was one of the bigger things that came in. I don't know if anyone can remember it. Basically, it's a place where you can ask a question and then people can anonymously answer it. And I'm group forum. What is it again? But it's become a tool that people are sort of asking for. Oh, I don't know. When you ask a question like, for instance, "Am I pretty?" online in a forum like that, you are bound to get people who are saying no, or especially when they can be asked anonymously. So I think just an understanding of cyberbullying and places where we can actually get into situations where kids are not going to be treated well. I'm not taking the stance that kids are asking for it in that sense, but to understand, I guess, a bit more about let me take that back a second here, or I'll kind of take it back a second. I think one of the important things that's happening, and I think it's kind of interesting in some ways, that if a kid posts a YouTube video today, there's almost 100% chance that someone out there is going to, in some way, say something in a bad way. They're gonna comment and say something that perhaps is totally unrelated to the video, and it'll be often some sort of attack on the person, which is something that a lot of kids are seeing. And when I talk to kids that are having that sort of issue, they seem to not even ignore it, like not even acknowledge it. Like it just seems to be part of that. In some ways, to me, I think that's encouraging. Not that we should allow for that discourse, but to let it just sort of bounce off us and not be important, and to realize that there are going to be things said about us that we have no control over. And in some ways, that's going to be working very well. In terms of cyberbullying, the issue, for the most part, almost everything we know about bullying transfers really well to cyberbullying. So what we've done in decades of bullying research, all of that stuff pretty much fits really well in terms of how we deal with it. Except from the very technical side, the difference between what bullying is versus cyberbullying is that we can use repeated, bullying is often face-to-face, it's often within a particular time, whereas cyberbullying extends beyond the actual physical sort of face-to-face interactions. So there is that bit of that anonymity, there is sort of repeated sort of threats and insults outside of the places that we can control. It becomes an issue for schools because schools can't really and shouldn't really, in some ways, control speech outside of schools. I saw a kid that was just expelled. I can't remember. I think it was in Indiana. There's a story just recently that a kid was expelled for swearing on Twitter that was totally outside of school hours, that was totally unrelated to class. So, I mean, it's a complex issue. Like, should we allow those things? Do we allow kids to have freedom of speech? Should we expel them because they tweeted in another place? And who has jurisdiction over those things? So I think that's what really makes cyberbullying difficult to deal with. But in many ways, I think if you want to learn more about cyberbullying in itself, because I think even the term is problematic, I would check out Dana Boyd's research. She's done a lot of work around it, and you can find most of her research at dana.org. I think that's her site. She's very good. She takes it from a number of different perspectives, whether it's a Mean Girls perspective, because she works a lot with teens and tweens, and in that sort of age, especially the Mean Girls sort of thing. So there's a lot of the gender-based pieces around cyberbullying. I mean, there's certainly different ways that kids act based upon their gender, and certainly gender roles that come to play a lot about it. So, but I think it's really important to understand the technology. But as schools, I think we just can't ignore it. We can't say let's just block everything and cyberbullying is going to go away, because that's not going to happen. We have to have a better understanding of where these things are happening, and by putting away the control of these things, we can better understand where it's actually happening. And I think we have to also open up communication between teachers and students in many different ways as well. Thank you for that. International Journal of Education, I'm not sure what that is, but that's probably a good place to look for a cyberbullying issue. I'm not sure if that helped with Verena, but I tried anyway. I do have some other, I think, literature and resources on cyberbullying. I'll see if I can find them. Sorry, I cut you off, Stephen.
Yeah, not a problem. Jenny McNeff asking, do you see problems with voyeurism online?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is that. I mean, there is that element. Some of the problems, I mean, there's some of that, and we're talking about. I mean, that's sort of happening. I guess the issues around sexting, I guess that were around for a while. I mean, there's a lot of media play around the idea of sexting. The research that went into that is that it's much less prevalent than we were thinking about. So if you look at that sort of thing, but there is sort of other types of voyeurism in the non-sexual kind. For instance, and this is somewhat related to your question, and in some ways not. There was a kid that I worked with, a school board that I worked with, and they had a kid who did some really creative stuff online, and he got like a ton of hits. a ton of hits, and so he actually ended up getting a lot of Google ad revenue. So this was like a 14-year-old kid doing something creative, doing something that people liked, and then he just couldn't repeat that success. So he was getting like $100, a month from ad revenue, got like 1 million plus views, and so then he just all of a sudden changed it to, what if I just jump off a building or something, like do that sort of the funniest, America's funniest videos kind of approach to doing something funny, and maybe even possibly getting hurt, just to kind of get those viewers up. And so I think that's kind of a bigger issue, especially in terms of the online and getting attention in many different ways, is we're seeing that kids are stretching their imagination and doing things that are potentially harmful physically, but certainly potentially harmful from another perspective. Now, there's other things that I think are a little bit more harmless, although they can be certainly irritating. There was this, I'll just bring up a video. There was a craze for a while called coning, which basically, here's a video about it, and I'll just show you what that looks like. Might as well just bring that up. And so this is basically, and if you heard about planking is a totally different thing too. So what basically people do is they go to McDonald's drive-in, and they'll basically grab the their ice cream, order ice cream, and grab
투자를 바꾸는 모바일 솔루션 한화증권 스마트 M.
And I mean, this isn't a huge issue. I think I've done worse things as a teen as well, but I think it's a bit irritating, I guess, to some. And I think, so for instance, there's like these drive-in wraps. I'm going to turn this off here. For instance, drive-in wraps, where people will go to drive-ins and they'll sing or whatever else. I'll just show you a good example of that, because I actually, to make a point, I've participated in a couple of these viral videos. So here's my take on viral videos.
I want a double cheeseburger and hold the lettuce. So because the sun no seeds in the bun be up in this drive-through order the two, I got it craving for number 9 like my shoe.
All right, so that was my, I had to participate as well. To understand the kids, I think I actually have to do that. So those are like 3 little scenes from my participation in some viral videos. The Numa Numa, the next one was the drive-through rap, and the last one was the Lolo guy, which was sort of an interesting meme that came up as well. So what's interesting about those, I mean, the second one, I actually went to a drive-in, and I asked, I made sure I went there late at night so there wasn't busy, because I felt really guilty about doing this. Yeah, it's not really viral. I felt guilty about doing that, so I asked the kid, I said something like, okay, I'm just going to do something for a few minutes, and, just, sorry, I'll buy something afterwards. And I just felt really bad about doing it. And so I did it again. I practiced this rap, and I did it, and which was interesting. And when I got to the end, this kind of kid gave me this sort of like frown, and he said, "Are you cool or something?" And it was just kind of funny. Just like, I'm just trying to do, like, I can't possibly explain the context because I was doing this for a class, but I could see how it might be annoying to people and that sort of thing. But I mean, that's a lot of interesting things that are happening these days. But I think that's kind of an important thing, and there's a lot of, and that's really kind of, it's for school, exactly. That's one of the things that is a bit scary, because, for instance, there's a lot of stuff that's going on the web that leads kids to something that is really potentially kind of offensive content. And I can think of one example. I won't talk about it specifically, but there was one video that was really, really quite inappropriate. Like, it goes beyond conventional, say, pornography, for instance, and it goes into this era that, exposure of content that most kids would not normally have access to. But on YouTube, there was a video of people, basically there was tons of these videos of people watching this video and getting grossed out by this video, which piqued the interest of many young kids. So there was video after video of people watching this video that no one wants to really watch, that's gross and offensive and so on. But because that became, so that the offensive content wasn't hosted on YouTube, it was on some other fringe site. But what happened is more and more people were wondering what this video. So in effect, by people watching a video and getting grossed out of it, it brought more attention to the video that no one should really ever watch in that way. And I guess that's kind of an interesting thing, is like, even though YouTube and those sorts of things are perfectly safe from a content aspect, it's how this media influences people to act one way, to access things that perhaps is detrimental. I do worry about things, especially, media and pornography and violence and that sort of thing. I think there are some really important issues, especially when kids are younger, they're developing a sexual identity or, any form of identity, and being exposed to things that are perhaps not appropriate at a particular level, developmentally, or psychologically, or otherwise. Stephen has posted something as well. For a while, owling was the new planking, which is kind of an interesting article as well. Anyway, so I'm not sure if I got to the question, but thanks, everyone. I will take more questions. I'll stay as long as you want me to be here.
There was another one posted into the chat area, and it was asking, I'm just looking for it, as my chat thing moves, but whether there's a relation between digital citizenship and socioeconomic status. Do you have any comments on that? That's from Tom Reeves.
I'm going to give you I'll give you a. No, I'm not going to dive into the literature on this, but I'm going to show you an example here. And this is something that I never got into, but I think it's really, really important. So I'm going to bring up a Twitter account, if it's still up, Jonathan Felix. Okay. Oh, let's see. Let's try it. Let's see. Let's what. And this is going to lead me to two different questions. So here's a kid by the name of Jonathan Felix, John Felix, and I'm sorry for the swears in his account. And so if you can take a look at that, I'll let you know that this kid, he actually was a model, and I'm referring to the past tense, so you can probably get a sense of it was. He actually was shot this last weekend in Winnipeg and passed away. And it was interesting that my niece actually modeled with him, so I didn't know him well, but I knew him in terms of seeing him on Facebook and that sort of thing. And the other part of this is, if you look at his Facebook page, it becomes this memorial or this shrine for him, and this outpouring of people who loved him. And I think that brings up this whole other idea of digital citizenship that I didn't bring up, this whole idea of what happens to our digital legacy. And there's a lot of companies that are talking about this, like what happens to us when we're gone, and what happens to our digital legacy. Who controls that? Who's our digital executor? I mean, there's companies that either allow you to pass it on to someone else, and there's other companies that say, well, if you don't log into your account for 60 days, I'm gonna this service will delete everything, because maybe people don't want to. Maybe people don't want. Maybe they have a double life, for instance, and they don't want certain emails or whatever else to be out there on anyone, and they want everything just deleted, which is really interesting. And so when you look at the idea of socioeconomic status, now this particular kid was a child of poverty, and I know that just from his background and from knowing his family and that sort of thing. And of course, which got him into the situation where he had some dreams and expectations. He graduated at the age of 21 from high school in Victoria. And it's interesting to see that his digital profile, it kind of shows a lot of that sort of piece as well. And I think that's really kind of an important thing, is that socioeconomic status, I mean, so much around your identity face-to-face will demonstrate your socioeconomic status. And I think this only extends to your face-to-face status. And I don't think he had the opportunities, perhaps, to demonstrate the fine kid that this kid actually was. And I think partly of that much of what his circumstances were, his peers and those around him were in a place that this sort of part of them didn't really matter. It didn't matter that you're positioning yourself towards a job or a career. And I know a lot of the digital citizenship stuff works on this idea that, well, you need to clean up your identity because you'll never get a job. And for others, it's not about that. It's much more about how do you just kind of be a better person, or how do you at least portray those aspects that are really good about you. and not have to do it because of the peers around you in some ways. And I think that there is certainly a tie to socioeconomic status, and a lot of the digital identity thing is driven around, well, if you post this, you're not going to get a job. And many adults will say, well, if YouTube was around when I was a kid, you're not, you know, if YouTube was around when I was a kid, I wouldn't get a job either. So I think it comes down to this whole idea that how do we forgive people? How do we become more accepting as a society that allows people that we know, and we acknowledge it by saying things like, if YouTube was around, I wouldn't have a job, you know, when I was a kid. We acknowledge that we do bad things as kids, and we make mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes, and that we just have to get better at forgiveness. And I think that's one of the most important aspects, and one thing that digital society is just not ready for. Anytime we can have these copies of our worst days and our worst mistakes, Stephen doesn't make mistakes, but I've made mistakes, and I'm glad they're not on YouTube. Perhaps I wouldn't be talking to you right now about these things. But I think that's kind of an important thing. Anyway, I'm not sure where I'm headed for that, and I'm not sure if I answered your question at all, but I do think they're very much tied, not only in the digital identity agenda, or sorry, you know, towards this whole push for a digital identity, whether it's that sort of corporate take on it, or in the reality of what it actually is that we can't escape in our identities our socioeconomic status.
Sorry about that. I think that's probably enough for today. We certainly appreciate you taking the extra time and effort to go over time. I know it was appreciated by the people here in the room, although now people are running off for supper or whatever they do late afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. This was an excellent presentation, and I'm sure that it will have many listens in the days and years to come as part of your digital legacy, and as part of the archive of the Change11 course, which is our collective digital legacy. So some of this stuff maybe never dies. So thanks a lot, Alex. I see you're about to say something, so I'll stop for a sec.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. I really want to thank everyone for coming and spending an hour and a half with me. That's a lot of time, and I really hope that it was worth your time. So anyway, take care. Connect with me online, and I'll certainly get all the notes up. And this is a great week. I'll be definitely following the conversation if there is one to be had. So take care. Goodbye. And thanks, Stephen, and thanks for the organizers of the conference, Dave and George.